The Spirit of Prophecy in the Bible's Redemptive Message, Part 2. Daniel's 70 Weeks, the keystone of Bible prophecy as understood in light of the Spirit of Prophecy. Welcome back. In Part 1 of this series, we looked at the Bible's messianic symbolism in light of the Bible's redemptive message. Our exploration looked at the messianic symbolism of the numbers 13 and 14 in the Bible's sacrificial rites and the biblical festivals in light of the Spirit of Prophecy. We saw how the life and ministry of Yeshua of Nazareth, as described in the New Testament, is an amazing fulfillment of this symbolism. And as such, the apostles and the early church understood Yeshua as the promised Messiah of the Old Testament. Even with this thrilling evidence, skeptics might argue that the New Testament apostles made the Old Testament prophecies fit their messianic hero. After all, they might claim, it's clear that Matthew did indeed arrange Yeshua's lineage so that his readers would make a connection between the biblical calendar, the Bible's sacred festivals, their sacrificial rites, and a Jewish hero named Yeshua, the son of Joseph. As we change gears here from a more panoramic view of the Bible's messianic symbolism to a focused exploration of the Bible's prophetic record, I'll provide you with thrilling biblical evidence to challenge such claims. As I explained in Part 1, nearly 1/4 of the Bible is composed of prophetic texts. A great deal of those prophetic texts speak of a promised Messiah, a Redeemer who reconciles mankind to Yahweh, the living God of the Bible. Of all the Bible's messianic prophecies, only one provides a specific, datable timeline for the coming of that Messiah. In other words, only one of the Bible's prophecies predicted the specific time when this messianic Redeemer would come. That prophecy is found in the book of Daniel chapter 9 and is commonly called the prophecy of 70 weeks. Let me introduce you to that prophecy now. Daniel 9:24 through 25. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks. And in 62 weeks the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with the many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. The underlying theme of my talk to you in Part 1 of the series has been the Spirit of Prophecy as a testimony of Yahweh's salvation. Here in Daniel 9:24 through 27, we see that theme on bold display. The prophecy begins by laying out 6 goals which will be accomplished during the 70 weeks. We won't go into great details, but let's look at them briefly now. '77's will finish the transgressions, make an end of sins, make reconciliation for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision and the prophecy, anoint the most holy. These 6 goals in verse 24 of Daniel 9 each tell of us an aspect of the Messiah's purpose in fulfilling Yahweh's redemptive plan, but uniquely to the biblical's prophetic text, they are confined to a 70-week period. This 70-week period of time bears further exploration. The word weeks, as is given in the King James Version of the Bible, comes from the Hebrew Shabua. It means sevens. By using the term weeks, the translators introduced a calendric bias which is not implied in the text. Weeks equals Shabua equals sevens. In Daniel, weeks simply means a period of sevens. The 70 weeks of Daniel 9:24 taken literally then means 77s, or 490 unspecified units of time. Kind of odd, don't you think? The greatest messianic prophecy in the Bible, the only one which gives a specific chronological marker for the coming of the Messiah, and we're given a generic quantity, not a specific measure of time? We have to ask ourselves why. After Part 1 of our exploration of the Spirit of Prophecy in the Bible's messianic symbolism, I think some of you might already have an idea of the measure of time Yahweh intended when he gave Daniel the prophecy of 77s. What better key to the greatest code in the Bible than the Bible's own prophetic calendar and its own unique method of reckoning time? A method, we might add, inseparably linked to the sacrificial rites of the Torah and Yahweh's heavenly Rolex. But before we explore a biblical reckoning of time and the prophecy of Daniel 9, we still need a better understanding of the prophecy as a whole. Let's now look at how this prophecy is divided into specific periods of time. After this overview, we will look at how those divisions are broken out in more detail. We'll start, for now, in Daniel 9:25a. Know therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. The first division of the 77's prophecy is a period of 7 sevens, or 449 units of time. This division of 77s starts with the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, and ends with the coming of the Messiah the Prince. The following chart is a visual way to represent this period of time. Moving on, the next division of the 77 is described in Daniel 9:25b. In 62 weeks the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. This period of 62 sevens is the longest period of time in the prophecy, and it's characterized chiefly by the construction of the plaza and the wall of the temple in Jerusalem. Keep in mind that the total prophecy consists of 70 sevens. So far, the 7 sevens and the 62 sevens represent 69 of the total of 70 sevens. For those of you who appreciate percentages, that's 98.6% of the prophecy. The next event described in the prophecy is found in Daniel 9:26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Here in Daniel 9:26, the cold, hard reality of the Messiah's redemptive efforts on our behalf is revealed. After 69 sevens, or 483 periods of time, the Messiah is cut off. Notice here in Daniel 9:26 it says the Messiah is cut off, but not for himself. To really appreciate what is being said here, you have to understand where cut off comes from in the Old Testament. The first occurrence of Karath in the Bible comes from Genesis 9:1 in the flood account. There it is a promise by Yahweh, the living God of the Bible, that he would never again destroy or Karath, cut off all mankind with a flood of water. Remember, Yahweh sent the flood because mankind's sins had become unbearable. They had jeopardized the human race. In Genesis, mankind was Karath for their sins. In Daniel 9:26, the Messiah, on the other hand, is cut off in place of mankind. He was Karath so we might live. Not for himself indeed. The balance of Daniel 9:26 describes the destruction of Jerusalem sometime after the 62 sevens. This leads into verse 27 in a description of the final events of the 77's prophecy. And he shall confirm the covenant with the many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Here, take a look at the chart. This final period of the prophecy is a single 7, and it completes the 77s. By far, this is the most controversial aspect of the prophecy. It tells of a he who confirms a covenant with the many for 1 period of 7. In the middle of that period, the sacrifices are stopped, and because of the abominations, he makes it desolate unto the consummation. Today, the consensus view is that the he of Daniel 9:27 refers to the Antichrist, alluded to as the prince of the people which destroys the Jerusalem, as mentioned in Daniel 9:26. According to this view, the Antichrist at some point in the future confirms a covenant with Israel for a period of 7 years. For perspective, this view of the prophecy sees the 69 sevens, which represents 98.6% of the prophecy, as being messianic, and then after a still undetermined gap, the final 1.4% of the prophecy is set in motion, that famous 7-year tribulation. but then they see it switching to an anti-Messiah perspective. Then there's a minority view which holds that the he of Daniel 9:27 is the Messiah, and the covenant referred to is a biblical covenant that Yeshua confirms with the Jewish people. This view of the prophecy sees the entire prophecy as a testimony of the Messiah's redemptive efforts on mankind's behalf. So which view is correct? How about a show of hands for those of you who have heard about the 7-year covenant which the Antichrist makes with the Jewish people? Okay, now how many of you have heard about the covenant of Daniel 9:4, which tells of a covenant Yahweh, the living God of the Bible, makes with the Jewish people? Most of you haven't heard of this covenant, have you? In fact, it's often ignored when the 77s is discussed. Later in our exploration of this prophecy, I'll show you why this covenant of Daniel 9:4 is critical to understanding the covenant of Daniel 9:27. As you will see, there's really no question about which covenant is meant by Daniel 9:27, nor the person that confirms it. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's back up just a second. So now we have the general idea of the prophecy of sevens is all about, as well as some of the challenges we face as we dig into the details. With this overview in mind, let's now turn our attention to the starting point of the prophecy of Daniel 9. That's the so-called commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. Once we have a solid foundation upon which to build this prophecy, we'll then be able to fill in the chronological details and see just what Yahweh intended when he gave us this prophecy to Daniel. We'll start with Daniel 9:25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. Think of Daniel 9:25 as the countdown to the Messiah, which begins with the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. From this important event, there are 7 sevens until the coming of the Messiah, which is our first major milestone in the prophecy. So who gave this famous commandment to restore and build Jerusalem? If you were to ask one of today's leading biblical scholars, you'd probably get one of 3 or 4 possible explanations. They would tell you this commandment was given by 3 or 4 different Persian kings in the Second Temple era, because only 4 possible decrees or commandments fulfill the biblical criteria of Daniel 9:25 to restore and build Jerusalem. Let's look at those 4 decrees briefly. First, we have a decree in the first year of Cyrus, which is roughly 538 to 536 BC. Then we have a decree in the second year of Darius in 520 BC. A decree in the 7th year of Artaxerxes in 458 BC. And finally, a decree in the 20th year of Artaxerxes in 445 BC. These are the 4 main contenders for the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem that have been offered over the years. Of these 4 decrees, by far the decree in the 20th year of Artaxerxes is the most often used as a starting point for the countdown to the Messiah. For those familiar with the prophecy of Daniel 9, it may surprise you to learn that there's one more commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, which has been all but ignored by biblical scholars. What is so difficult to understand about this oversight is that this decree is the most clearly witnessed decree in the Bible, and it was given by the most important person in the Bible, namely Yahweh, the living God of the Bible. Kind of hard to believe, isn't it? Well, let me tell you about this decree. Let's take a look at Daniel 9:25 once more. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment, or debar, to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. In the passage above, the English word commandment comes from the Hebrew word debar. Debar means a word, a speech, or utterance. In the Old Testament, debar is used 1,439 times. Of these occurrences, the vast majority refer to the word, speech, or utterance of Yahweh, the living God of the Bible. Interestingly, debar is used not once, but 4 times in Daniel 9. Of those, 3 clearly refer to the words of Yahweh. Here, let's take a look at those. Daniel 9:2. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years wherefore the word of debar of Yahweh came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. The second occurrence comes from Daniel 9:12. And he, which was Yahweh, hath confirmed his words, debar, which he spake against us and against our judges that judged us, by bringing upon us this great evil. For under the whole heaven hath not been done as been done unto Jerusalem. A third occurrence comes from Daniel 9:23. And at the beginning of thy supplications the commandment, Debar, came forth from Yahweh, and I have come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter, and consider the vision. And the fourth occurrence of Debar in Daniel 9. Know therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment, or Debar, to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince, shall be 7 weeks. A bit curious, don't you think, that even though Debar is used 3 times in Daniel 9 to refer to the word of Yahweh, that seldom do you see anyone suggest that the Debar of Daniel 9:25 could be the word or Debar of Yahweh, the living God of the Bible? I mean, come on, wouldn't it at least be natural to at least consider the possibility that the most important messianic prophecy in the Bible would begin with the word of the person who gave that prophecy? We must ask ourselves why. Why is the most important person in the Bible not even mentioned as a possibility when discussing those who gave a commandment or word which begins the countdown to the Messiah? Is it because there's no evidence for such a decree? As you will see, this is not the case. In fact, you'll be hard-pressed to find a more documented decree in the entire Bible. You know, after studying the prophecy of Daniel 9 for over 2 decades and reading dozens and dozens of books written about it, I found that one of the biggest oversights when discussing the prophecy is that the context of the Second Temple era is often ignored. In other words, most people don't understand how the people and events of the Second Temple era relate to the prophecy of Daniel 9 and the commandment to restore and build. This oversight obscures the context of Daniel 9 and provides a basis for many of the interpretational errors we see in Bible prophecy in our generation. Today, let's remedy that. We'll be reading quite a bit of scripture here, but stick with me because the extra effort will pay off. Daniel 9 and the 77s will make much more sense when we understand the underlying context of the people, places, and events described. To begin, let's start in Daniel 9:1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years whereof the word, or Debar, of Yahweh came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. See, here Daniel 9 opens with Daniel dating this vision to the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, who was made king of the Chaldeans. This Darius, scholars believe, was viceroy to Cyrus of Persia when he conquered Babylon that famous night when Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, saw the handwriting on the wall. It was that night after Cyrus and his armies diverted the Euphrates River and walked under Babylon's walls through the dry riverbed that the famous city of Babylon was captured. Historically speaking, this event was roughly 538 BC. As we read in the opening pages of Daniel 9, or passage rather, Daniel read in the book of Jeremiah that his captivity was drawing to a close. You see, many years earlier, the prophet Jeremiah had warned the people that because they refused to keep the Torah, Yahweh was going to send them the king of Babylon to take them captive for a period of 70 years. Indeed, that's what happened. Nebuchadnezzar came up to Jerusalem and took them captive. He did this several times, but the first stands out because Daniel and his companions Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken. Here's the ancient prophecy of Jeremiah for context. Jeremiah 25:11 and 12. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And it shall come to pass, when the 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith Yahweh, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it a perpetual desolations. Now picture Daniel, a very old man who lived as captive in the land of Babylon for nearly 7 years, reading this prophecy of Jeremiah and realizing that his captivity was almost over. Daniel, like few others, was in a position to understand Jeremiah's prophecy because Daniel's own captivity in Babylon began those 70 years. Once Daniel understood just how close to the end of their captivity they were, he petitions Yahweh to remember his divine word. This petition to Yahweh is recorded in the first 23 verses of Daniel 9 and is one of the most moving prayers found in the Bible. Let's take a minute to read Daniel's petition to Yahweh. The 77's prophecy cannot be fully understood without the context of this wonderful intercessory prayer. Once again, Daniel 9:1-4. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, Daniel, understood by books the number of years whereof the word, or Debar, of Yahweh came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolation of Jerusalem. And I set my face unto you, Lord God, to seek by prayer and supplications, with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed unto Yahweh my God, and made my confession, and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him and that keep his commandments. To start off it's important to note here that the first words out of Daniel's mouth were a petition to Yahweh to remember his covenant and mercy. Keep this in mind because Daniel had a very specific covenant in mind here, and later we will trace this covenant and mercy through the Old Testament to a covenant Yahweh swore with Abraham. Thrillingly, it could be called an oath of sevens, which promised that someday a seed would come through whom all nations of the earth would be blessed. You know, I can't help but get excited here. The Bible is so congruent. When you understand the spirit of prophecy, you can't help but see that the hand of Yahweh as he's working his salvation through the biblical ages. Let's continue now with Daniel 9, but don't worry, we'll revisit this thrilling subject of the covenant of mercy, because it's a very contextual bedrock upon which the prophecy of 77 rests. Continuing with Daniel 9 now. We have sinned, and we have committed iniquity, and we have done wickedly, and have rebelled, even by departing from thy precepts and from thy judgments. Neither have we hearkened unto thy servants the prophets, which spake in thy name to our kings or our princes, our fathers, and to all the people of land. O Lord, righteousness belongeth unto thee, but unto us confusion of face, as it is this day, to the men of Judah, and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel that are near, and those that are far off, through all the countries whither thou hast driven them, because of their trespasses that they have trespassed against thee. O Lord, to us belongeth confusion of faith, and to our kings, to our princes, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against thee. To the Lord God belongeth mercy and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against him. Neither have we obeyed the voice of Yahweh our God to walk in his laws, which he set before us by the servants the prophets. Yea, all Israel has transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath, Shabua, that is, written in the law of Moses the servant of God, because he has sinned against him. And he hath confirmed his words which he spake against us and against our judges that judged us, by bringing upon us a great evil. For unto the whole heaven hath not been done as been done upon Jerusalem. As it is written in the law of Moses, all this evil has come upon us, yet we made not our prayer before Yahweh our God, that we might turn from our iniquities and understand thy truth. Therefore hath Yahweh watched upon the evil, and hath brought it upon us. For Yahweh our God is righteous in all his works which he doeth, for we obeyed not his voice. And now, O Lord our God, that hath brought thy people forth out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand, and hast gotten thee renowned as it is this day, we have sinned, we have done wickedly. O Lord, according to all thy righteousness, I beseech thee, let thine anger and thy fury be turned away from the city of Jerusalem, thy holy mountain, because of our sins, and for the iniquities of our fathers. Jerusalem and all thy people are become a reproach to all that is about us. Now therefore, O our God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate, for the Lord's sake. O my God, incline thine ear, and hear. Open thine eyes, and behold our desolations in the city which is called by thy name. If we do not present our supplications before thee for our righteousness, or for thy great mercies. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hearken and do, and defer not, for thine own sake. O my God, and for thy city and thy people that are called by thy name. And while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplications before Yahweh my God for the holy mountain of my God, yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. Now that's a prayer that touched the heart of Yahweh and sets the angelic hosts in action, don't you think? A couple of things worth noting here. First, Daniel's humility. His prayer acknowledges his own and his people's sinfulness in the eyes of Yahweh. This was a prayer for forgiveness, for reconciliation, and restoration. In answer to this prayer, Yahweh sent the vision of 77s, which told Daniel when and how this forgiveness, reconciliation, and restoration would take place. Instead of petitioning his case upon the merits of his own, he asked Yahweh to act for his holy name's sake and for his city Jerusalem. Daniel didn't see Jerusalem primarily as a place for his people to return to, but rather a place where Yahweh could return to and where Daniel and his people might serve him and at his holy temple. Never lose sight of this fact that without the presence of Yahweh, Jerusalem is no different than any other city in the world, and the temple in Jerusalem without the presence of Yahweh is just another human monument made to a nameless and faceless invention of man. Here's an overview of the events we have read about so far. As you can see in the chart, roughly 604 BC began Daniel's captivity and the 7 years captivity prophesied by Jeremiah. This is marked in yellow on the chart. During the 7 years, Judah was held captive in Babylon. This captivity period ended with the first year of Cyrus, when he became king of Babylon and allowed the Jewish people to return and build Jerusalem and the temple. 14 years into Daniel's captivity, Yahweh departed the temple in Jerusalem, and then a short time later the temple was completely destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. This departure of Yahweh from Jerusalem began a 70-year period of divine anger. On the chart, you'll see it marked in red. This divine anger and fury is what Daniel is referencing in Daniel 9:16. During the 7 years of divine anger, several important events take place which set the stage for Yahweh's commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. First, the Persian king Cyrus allows those Judean captives who wish to return to Jerusalem permission to do so. Further, Cyrus authorizes the Jewish people to return and build their temple. And a contingent of Jewish people do just that. They return to Jerusalem and begin work. This group of repatriates is led by Joshua the high priest and Zerubbabel the appointed governor. But they only get as far as laying some of the foundation stones before the work on the temple grinds to a halt. For the next 16 years, work on the temple is interrupted by the harassment of the surrounding nations who hate the Jewish people and do not want to see a Jewish nation-state restored. Truth be told, according to the accounts of Ezra 1-6 and Haggai 1, the returning captives' construction efforts on the temple were only half-hearted anyway. While Yahweh's house lay desolate, they were busy building their own homes. Then Yahweh decided to take a hand. The time had come for the next step in Yahweh's redemptive plan, or his countdown to the Messiah. I'll let the prophet Haggai explain. Haggai 1:1-8. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, on the 1st day of the month, came the word or debar of Yahweh by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Jerusalem, and to Joshua the son of Jozadak the high priest, saying, Thus speaketh Yahweh of hosts, saying, This people say, the time is not come, the time that Yahweh's house should be built. Then came the word of Yahweh by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in sealed houses, and this house lie waste? Thus saith Yahweh of hosts, Consider your ways. Go up to the mountain and bring wood, and build Yahweh's house. And I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, saith Yahweh. So you understand what is happening here. Joshua was the high priest who returned with the captives under the decree of Cyrus in 536, and Zerubbabel was the appointed governor during that period as well. In 520 BC, at the end of the 7 years of divine anger, Yahweh, through the prophet Haggai, tells Joshua and Zerubbabel, as the religious and political leaders of the people, to get busy building his house, which was at the very heart of Jerusalem. Just to make sure they understood he was serious, Yahweh sent the prophet Zechariah with a similar message. Let's read that now. Zechariah 1:7-16. Upon the 24th day of the 11th month, which was the month Sebat, in the 2nd year of Darius, came the word, or debar, of Yahweh unto Zechariah the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo the prophet. Then the angel of Yahweh answered and said, O Yahweh of hosts, how long wilt thou not have mercy on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah, against which thou hast had indignation these 70 years? So the angel that communed with me said unto me, Cry thou, saying, Thus saith Yahweh of hosts, I am jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with a great jealousy, and I am sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease. For I was but a little displeased, and they helped forward the affliction. Therefore thus saith Yahweh, I am returned to Jerusalem with mercies. My house shall be built in it, saith Yahweh of hosts, and a line shall be stretched forth upon Jerusalem. Out of the mouth of two witnesses we have the word, or debar, of Yahweh, commanding the Jewish people to return and build Jerusalem and his temple. Now think back to Daniel's prayer to Yahweh in Daniel 9:4-21. Do you remember what Daniel asked Yahweh for? He asked Yahweh to forgive their sins and their iniquities. He also asked Yahweh to remember his holy covenant, his holy city, and the desolate sanctuary. Let's read that once more again. Daniel 9:16-19. O Lord, according to all thy righteousness, I beseech thee, let thine anger and thy fury be turned away from the city of Jerusalem, thy holy mountain, because of our sins, and for the iniquities of our fathers. Jerusalem and thy people are become a reproach to all that is about us. Now therefore, O God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate for the Lord's sake. O my God, incline thine ear and hear. Open thine eyes and behold our desolations in the city which is called by thy name. For we do not present our supplications before thee for our righteousness, but for thy great mercies. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hearken and do. Defer not for thine own sake, O my God, for thy city and thy people that are called by thy name. Isn't that awesome? Daniel, a captive in Babylon, realizing after reading the prophecy of Jeremiah that the 70 years of captivity are almost over. Daniel, knowing that the time is short, petitions Yahweh to forgive his people, to remember his holy city and the desolate sanctuary. In answer to Daniel's prayer, Yahweh sends a prophecy of 77, a prophecy which begins with the word, or debar, to restore and build Jerusalem. And just so no one has any room for doubt about it, Ezra, the Bible's most famous priest and scribe, records this monumental event in Ezra 6. Here, take a look. Ezra 6:14 through 15. And the elders of the Jews builded, and they prophesied through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they builded and finished it according to the commandment of God of Israel, and according to the commandment of Cyrus and Darius, even Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, which was the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Do you see what happens when you allow the Bible to define its own context? The greatest messianic prophecy in the Bible didn't begin with an ambiguous decree by a secular Persian ruler, but rather the very command or word of the living God of the Bible. So why is this divine word to restore and build Jerusalem given by Yahweh almost universally ignored when looking at the starting point of the prophecy of 77s? In my opinion, the most likely reason is that biblical scholars and teachers aren't able to show how this decree might be fulfilled in Yeshua. After all, these divine decrees to restore and build are all dated to the 2nd year of Darius, the great Artaxerxes, which, secularly speaking, is the year 520 BC. How then can the 77s, or 490 periods of time, extend all the way to 520 BC to the start of the 1st century in the time of Christ? Good question, isn't it? But now that we have a reasonable starting point for our countdown to the Messiah, let's look more closely at the 77s to see how a biblical reckoning of time can be applied to solving this prophetic puzzle. Daniel 9:25a. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment or debar to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. Let's talk about the 7 sevens of Daniel 9 for a moment. If you recall, we briefly talked about the fact that the term weeks here in the text comes from the Hebrew Shabua and simply means sevens without any calendric implications. So 7 sevens then means 49 periods of time. I say simply, but frankly, it's not quite that simple. In fact, it's quite thrilling because the word Shabua here has some rather unusual characteristics. In Daniel 9:25, the plural masculine form of the word of Shabua is used. Here, take a look at the following chart. Bear with me here because it's important. In the first row of the left column is the Hebrew spelling of the word Shabua, which means 7. Or sevens, excuse me. The second word in the first column is the plural masculine spelling of Shabua as it is used in Daniel 9:25. As you can see, the phonetic spelling has changed. This fact is important because phonetically the plural masculine form of Shabua then becomes identical to another Hebrew word, namely Shabiam, which means 70. Let me add one more important piece of information. Do you see those little dots and squiggles above and below the Hebrew spelling of the word? Those embellishments used to differentiate between the Hebrew words like Shabua and Shabiam are called vowel pointings. And they were not added to the Hebrew scriptures until the Middle Ages. In other words, when the book of Daniel was written, the only way to determine the difference between Shabua, 7s, and Shabiam, 70, was by the context of the passage. In other words, Daniel 9:25, when it was given, could have read 7 sevens under the Messiah, or it could have read 77s under the Messiah. This raises the intriguing possibility that both measures of time might have been intended. In other words, like a play on words. Take a look again once more at the chart showing how the prophecy of 77s is divided into its respective time frames. Notice in the chart the green section, the 7 sevens or 49 units of time. This begins with a commandment to restore and build Jerusalem and ends with the coming of the Messiah. Scholars have long questioned how the messianic figure prophesied in Daniel 9:25 could come 7 sevens or 49 periods of time after the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, yet still be alive 62 sevens or 434 periods of time later to be cut off. Could the Hebrew usage of the Shavua be the key to understanding this difficult passage? Most scholars ignore it, but think about it for a moment. Daniel 9:24 through 27 is a chronological prophecy which tells of 2 comings of a messianic figure separated by 434 periods of time. If the 2 messianic figures mentioned in Daniel 9 refer to the same person, then the timing aspect of the prophecy must be flexible enough to allow for a near and far fulfillment. That is exactly what we have here with the Hebrew word Shavua. The passage can quite literally read 7 sevens, which would make sense in the context of the entire 77s. Or it could read 70 sevens unto the Messiah, which would make sense if read just separately as the 49 periods of time between the commandment restore and the Messiah. Hold that thought for just a minute. I promise it'll make more sense later. But first, let me show you an unusual statement made by Yeshua in Matthew 18:22 that just might be a reference to Daniel 9:25 and the numerical play on words mentioned there. Then came Peter to him and said, O Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Intriguing, isn't it? Here in Matthew 18 is a passage which speaks of forgiveness and 77s. Could it be that Yeshua had Daniel 9 in mind here? After all, Daniel 9 is a prophecy which speaks of the Messiah who comes after 7 sevens, or, as we saw with the usage of the word Shabua, 77s. And at its very core, prophecy is a message of forgiveness for his brethren, the Jewish people. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Now think back to the messianic symbolism looked at earlier as expressed by the biblical calendar and the sacrificial rites. We saw that during the Feast of Tabernacles there was an unusual countdown on those sacrificial rites. In fact, it was a 7-day countdown of 70 sacrifices beginning with 13. Let's look at that amazing symbolism again, because I want to impress upon you the congruency of the Bible's messianic symbolism as it relates to the spirit of prophecy and its redemptive message. Fascinating chart, isn't it? As we learned earlier, this intriguing 7-day countdown of 70 sacrifices, beginning with 13 and ending with 7, is ingeniously represented by the Apostle Matthew in the 1st chapter of the New Testament. Take another look at the Matthew's list in the 2nd column of Yeshua's kingly lineage. The missing names are marked out for special emphasis between the 6th and 7th generation and the 13th and 14th generation. Further, as we learned in part 1, 6 and 7 is an internal cycle of the solar side of the biblical calendar, and 13 and 14 the internal cycles of the lunar side of the biblical calendar. And to cap off this intriguing arrangement of names and numbers, we find that it was during the reign of Jehoiakim, that missing king between the 13th and 14th generation, whose name means Yahweh raises up, that the Bible introduced us to a young Jewish captive named Daniel, a man who would someday receive a prophecy of 77s. Intriguing, isn't it? So what does all this mean? Are the sacrificial rites of the Old Testament, the cycles of the biblical calendar, the lineage of Yeshua in Matthew 1, and the prophecy of 77s related to each other in some stunning way? Or is all this just a strange coincidence helped along by an overzealous 1st century apostle of Yeshua? For now, let me ask you to entertain the possibility that all of this is not a coincidence or misguided efforts of the Apostle Matthew, but rather inspired genius which gathers some of the most important redemptive symbolism of the Bible and combines it into a demonstrable proof that Yeshua fulfilled a 600-year-old prophecy which foretold the precise time of the coming Messiah. Daniel 9 is a prophecy which tells of the coming Messiah after 77s or 490 unspecified periods of time. Matthew, in the 1st chapter of the New Testament, reminds his Jewish readers that Yeshua is the Bible's promised Messiah, and he does so in stunning calendric symbolism. So can we use the Bible's calendar to prove that Yeshua was a Messiah of Daniel 9? Let's see. Earlier I showed you that on the 1st day of the 6th month of the 2nd year of Darius the Great Artaxerxes, a divine word, or debar, to restore and build Jerusalem was given. Then 6 months later, this divine decree was confirmed in the 24th day of the 11th month of the 2nd year of Darius, when Yahweh told Zechariah that he had returned to Jerusalem with mercy, and that his house should be built in a line stretched forth upon Jerusalem. So right here we have roughly a 6-month period of time during which Yahweh's divine word to restore and build was given. Then in the middle of this prophetic window, we have a thrilling messianic message given to Zerubbabel, the governor. It was given to him through the prophet Haggai, a message which speaks of the temple, the glory of Yahweh, and the coming Messiah. Let's read this thrilling passage, keeping in mind its place within this window of divine word, or debar, to restore and build Jerusalem. Haggai 2, 18 through 23. Consider now, from this day and upward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, even from the day that the foundation of Yahweh's house, or temple, was laid. Consider it. Is seed yet in the barn? Yea, as yet the vine and the fig tree and the pomegranate and the olive tree have not brought forth. From this day I will bless you. And again the word of Yahweh came unto Haggai in the 20th day of the month, saying, Speak unto Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I will shake the heavens and the earth, and I will overthrow the throne of kingdoms. I will destroy the strength of kingdoms and of the heathen, and I will overthrow the chariots and those that ride in them, and the horses and their riders shall come down, every one by the sword of his brother. In that day, saith Yahweh of hosts, I will take thee, O Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of Shealtiel, saith Yahweh, and I will make thee as a signet, for I have chosen thee, saith Yahweh of hosts. It's important to understand here that Zerubbabel was the 11th removed grandfather of Yeshua, as recorded in Matthew 1. In the passage we just read, the future day of the Lord is described, and Zerubbabel is described as a signet ring or ruler. Further, in Zechariah 3, 6, and 10, Zerubbabel is described as bringing forth the headstone in the same context of Yahweh bringing forth the Messiah, the branch. So when Haggai talks about him as a signet, and Zechariah talks about him as bringing forth the headstone, it must be understood not only in its Second Temple era context as the man responsible for building the physical temple, where the Jewish people would meet with Yahweh, but also in a future human temple where Yahweh became flesh and dwelt among mankind. 1,000 years before Yeshua, King David described it this way. Psalm 118, 21 through 23. I will praise thee, for thou hast heard me, and art become my salvation. The stone which the builders refused has become head of the corner. This is the Yahweh's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. Now Acts 4, 10 through 12. Be it known unto you all, and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom ye crucified, whom God raised from the dead, even by him doth this man stand before you whole. This is the stone which was set at naught of you builders, which has become the head of the corner. Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men, whereby we must be saved. Amazingly congruent, isn't it? What we've done here is by reading these passages is to show that Zerubbabel, as mentioned in Haggai 2, is a foreshadowing of the coming Messiah, the headstone, the branch, the very salvation of Yahweh, all within the chronological context of a call to consider or mark from this day forward. Let's read Haggai 2 once more. Consider now from this day upward, and from the 24th day of this 9th month, from the day that the foundation of Yahweh's temple was laid, consider it. Is the seed yet in the barn? Yea, as yet the vine, the fig tree, and the pomegranate, and the olive tree hath not brought forth. From this day I will bless you. So, in the middle of the 6-month window of time when Yahweh's divine word to restore and build was given, we have the living God of the Bible, Yahweh, telling Haggai to consider, appoint, or mark, or in other words, count from this day forward, because from this day forward he will bless you. In a physical sense, this day marked the completion of the temple foundation, a building effort led by Zerubbabel, the grandfather of Yeshua, or the great-great-grandfather of Yeshua, a man who would someday bring forth the headstone, not by his own power or might, but by the Spirit of Yahweh. In a prophetic sense, this day was even more important because it marked the starting point of the greatest countdown of the Bible. It marked the countdown of the Messiah, Yeshua, the great-great-grandson of Zerubbabel. Let me show you something really awesome. Okay, so the countdown begins the 24th day of the 9th month in the 2nd year of Darius. There are 7 Shabuah, or Shabiim, to the Messiah, 49 or 490 periods of time, depending on how you read the word Shabuah in the passage of Daniel 9:25. The Bible's heavenly calendar, the sacrificial rites of the Old Testament, and the lineage of Yeshua in Matthew 1 all associate the numbers 13 and 14 with the Bible's redemptive message and the coming Messiah. As we have seen in the biblical 13th month, which reconciles or intercalates the solar side of the biblical calendar and its endless cycles of 6 and 7, which remind mankind of their labor under the curse of sin, with the other side of the biblical calendar, that lunar cycle, which speaks prophetically of Yahweh's redemptive promise of a coming Redeemer. Most years have 12 lunar cycles, but every 3 years or so, the Bible needs a 13th month to reconcile both sides of this calendar. In essence, then, the biblical year varies depending on the number of lunar cycles in its year. So if the Bible's calendar is calculated based on a certain number of lunar cycles, let's calculate the prophecy of Daniel 9 using the same approach, only let's use the Messiah factors of 13 and 14. Let's start by using a 13th month lunar cycle beginning on the 24th day of the 9th month of the second year of Darius and see where it takes us in biblical history. As you can see in the chart above, the Messiah factor of 13 takes us from the winter of 520 BC, when the divine command to restore and build Jerusalem was given, until that word of Yahweh became flesh in the winter of 5 BC. Using the prophecy of 77s, or 7 Shabuim, we find that from the word to restore and build Jerusalem given by Yahweh, the living God of Bible, it was 77s, or 515.02 years to the winter of 5 BC, which coincided with the Feast of Hanukkah, or the Festival of Lights as it is sometimes called. This day marked the coming of the Messiah Yeshua as human flesh. 9 months later, Yeshua, the Word of Yahweh, dwelt with or tabernacled with mankind. Let me give you a few more biblical proofs which help cement the winter of 5 BC during the Festival of Hanukkah as the auspicious date when Mary conceived Yeshua and Yahweh became flesh. Some of you probably remember Yeshua's statement in John 8 and 9 where Yeshua stood up and said, "I am the light of the world." Let's take a look at that passage. John 8:12. Then spake Jesus unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. In John 9:5, as long as I am the world, I am the light of the world. To really appreciate these two statements in John, we have to understand their context. You see, these two passages were spoken by Yeshua while he was in Jerusalem during the Feast of Hanukkah, also known as the Feast of Dedication, or Festival of Lights. And it was at Jerusalem, in the Feast of Dedication, it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. You see, a century and a half before the time of Yeshua, a Greek Seleucid king, Antiochus Epiphanes, conquered Jerusalem and defiled the temple by sacrificing a pig on the altar. 3 years later, the Jewish heroes of the Maccabee family defeated Antiochus, cleansed the temple, and rededicated it. As part of the rededication ceremony, starting on the 25th day of the 9th biblical month and continuing until the 2nd or 3rd day of the 10th month, a candle is lit for each of the 8-day celebration. Thus, the celebration became known as the Festival of Lights. So you see, as Yeshua is standing here, they're in the temple during this great and joyous celebration, which had lighting of candles representing the return of the presence of God, a celebration which marked the very anniversary in human history when Yahweh, the living God of the Bible, became human flesh. He boldly proclaims, I am the light of the world. As you can see, there are no accidents in history, but rather Yahweh writing on the pages of history his story of Yeshua, the spirit of prophecy. A story which was foretold by a heavenly messenger and recorded by a Judean captive named Daniel, 6 centuries before it happened. A countdown which began on the eve of what would someday become the Festival of Lights. A countdown which began with a commandment and a promise. A commandment to consider or count from this day forward, and a promise that from that day Yahweh would bless them. A blessing which the New Testament book of Acts records this way. Acts 3:18 through 26. But those things which God before has showed by the mouth of all his prophets, that Christ should suffer, he hath so fulfilled. Repent ye therefore, and be converted, that your sins may be blotted out, when the times of refreshing shall come from the presence of the Lord. And he shall send Jesus Christ, which before was preached unto you, whom the heavens must receive until the times of restitution of all things, which God hath spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began. For Moses truly said unto the fathers, A prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren like unto me. him ye shall hear in all things whatsoever he shall say unto you. And it shall come to pass that every soul which shall not hear that prophet shall be destroyed from among his people. And all the prophets from Samuel and those that follow after, as many as have spoken, have likewise foretold of these days. Ye are the children of the prophets and of the covenant which God made with our fathers, and saying unto Abraham, and in thy seed shall all the kindreds of the earth be blessed. Unto you first God, having raised up his Son Jesus, sent him to bless you, and turning away every one of you from your iniquities. Did you catch the spirit of prophecy in this passage? Yahweh, from the very beginning of time, through his prophets, has been revealing his plan of Yeshua, his salvation to mankind, so that we might turn away from our iniquities and be reconciled to him. Yeshua was sent to bless you. To really round out this part of our study, let's look at one more passage which reveals more about Yeshua's redemptive efforts on our behalf. John 1:1-14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And in him was life, and that life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. The same came for a witness, to bear witness of that light. And all men through him might believe. He was not the light, but was sent to bear witness of the light. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. And he came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave the power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of God. Nor the will of man, but of God. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. A few things stand out in this passage. First, the Word, or Logos, was with God in the beginning. This was the light of Yahweh, sent to show mankind the way back to Yahweh. Second, as part of his redemptive purpose, this Word became flesh, and then dwelt among mankind. We know from the prophecy of Daniel 9:24 that Yahweh's divine word, or Debar, began a countdown which resulted in his word becoming flesh in the winter of 5 BC. 9 months, or 40 weeks later, this word was born into this world as Yeshua, Yahweh's salvation, and for the next 30 plus years this word dwelt with mankind. As awesome as this is, there's more to the passage of John which relates to Yeshua, his conception, birth, and the Bible's messianic symbolism. You see, in John 1:14, he tells us that Yeshua dwelt among mankind. The word dwelt comes from the Greek skinu, which comes from the Greek skinos, which means tabernacle. According to the biblical reckoning of time, 9 months, or 40 weeks after the Messiah's conception in the winter of 5 BC, his birth would take place in the fall of 4 BC, around the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles, as many of you know, is an 8-day feast of Yahweh during which the Jewish people were required to dwell in tabernacles or booths made of tree branches. This feast, many believe, not only marks the birth of the Messiah, but foreshadows the coming millennial reign of Yeshua, when he dwells with mankind for 1,000 years. For those of you who missed part 1, we looked closer at the biblical feast days in part 1 of this series. But let's return to the Nativity for just a moment longer. There is one additional piece of evidence which is related to the Messiah's birth that should really thrill you. Luke tells us the story. Luke 1:5-32. There was in the days of Herod the king of Judea a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abia, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they had no child because that Elizabeth was barren, and they both were now well stricken in years. And it came to pass that while they executed the priest's office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense. And there appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John. And it came to pass that as soon as the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. And after those days his wife Elizabeth conceived, and hid herself 5 months, saying, Thus hath the Lord dealt with me in the days wherein he looked upon me, and to take away my approach from among men. And in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee, named Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. And the virgin's name was Mary. And the angel came unto her and said, Hail, thou art highly favored, and the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. And when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying, and cast in her mind what manner of salutation this should be. The angel said unto her, Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God. And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb, and shalt bring forth a son, and shalt call his name Jesus, or Yeshua, Yahweh's salvation. And he shall be great, and shall be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. Most of you know the story of Zacharias. He and his wife Elizabeth were without child. But during the course of his duties as priest, an angel appeared to him and told him that his wife would conceive and bear a son. They did indeed bear a son, and the story goes on to tell that Elizabeth's cousin Mary, the mother of Yeshua, also conceived, her conception taking place in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy. What's neat about this bit of chronological detail is that we can use it to give us another perspective on the timing of the birth of Yeshua. You see, Zacharias served as a priest during the course of Abia. This was the 8th priestly course of 24. The courses began their service in the 1st month. If the priestly courses served in the same manner as the other services set out by King David as described in Chronicles 1, 24 and 27 and 1 Kings 4, then each priestly course served for 2 weeks. Zacharias' service then would have fallen in the latter part of the 4th biblical month, and Elizabeth's conception likely in the 5th. According to the Gospel of Luke, Mary's conception took place in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, thus placing the birth of Yeshua in the 7th month during either the 13th or 14th priestly course. As you can notice in the chart here, Zacharias' priestly service began in the course of Abia, which was the 8th month. Elizabeth's conception began in the 9th course, and her pregnancy extended all the way to the new year in the month Iyar, or the 2nd month. Mary's conception took place in the 6th month and extended all the way to the 7th month, or the 13th or 14th priestly course. In the chart, notice also that the 13th priestly course was named Huppah, which means canopy, and the 14th Jehoshaphat, which means dwelling with the Father. Thus the very priestly courses confirm the ancient words of Isaiah 7:14 as recorded in Matthew 1:21 through 23. You look at the neat symbolism here. Matthew 1:21 through 23. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, or Yahweh's salvation, for he shall save his people from their sins. Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled which is spoken of the Lord by the prophet Isaiah, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us. Now the passage from Isaiah 7:14. Therefore Yahweh himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Dwelling of the Father indeed. We've taken quite a journey so far, haven't we? We've looked in wonder at the Bible's calendar and its heavenly messianic display in part 1 of this series. We looked at the sobering sacrificial rites of the Torah and their significance to the Bible's redemptive message. We've looked at the thrilling lineage of Yeshua as arranged by the Apostle Matthew to show that Yeshua fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies which spoke of a coming Redeemer. And last but not least, now that we've looked at Daniel 9:25 and its amazing Hebrew play on words, that Shabuim, which showed us that the word of Yahweh became flesh in the winter of 5 BC, likely during the Festival of Lights. Further, according to the natural order of mankind, a reasonable case can be made that 40 weeks later, this child was born and tabernacled or dwelled with mankind during the biblical Feast of Tabernacles. As thrilling as this information is, we've only looked at the first 2 divisions of the prophecy of 77s. In part 3 of this series, we'll take a look at the final period of the prophecy of 77s and the infamous covenant of Daniel 9:27 as it relates to the context of Daniel 9:4. I'll see you next time as we explore this wonderful prophecy in more detail.